Medical professionals, what is the stupidest misconception a patient has had about the human body? I still remember reading a Reddit comment from a doctor years ago that they were telling the person they were about to lose a finger. They said the person seemed way too okay with it. So the doctor asked how they were handling it so well, and the person genuinely told them that it won't be too bad because at least fingers grow back. It began a whole slew of comments from other doctors with patients who had the same misconceptions about limb amputations. I had a father of a baby absolutely beside himself because his newborn baby had no teeth. They seem to think that by pausing our seizure to inform us that they're having a seizure, they'll get Benzos. Lol no. How are you feeling today? Not great. I have a cough that starts from an emotion in my throat and chest. That emotion disturbs me. A bacterial pneumonia. Not a medical professional but a biology teacher. Anyone who has seen a picture of the pituitary gland may understand why I had a student who thought the testicles were in the brain. There are a few times a year where a teacher may have to try and hide their incredulous astonishment at student misconceptions, and I'm ashamed to say I didn't manage it that time. Did you have anything this morning for your fasting blood draw? No. Just tea with honey. And a glass of orange juice. My mother, a doctor, volunteered to give a health lecture to high school girls in the South, Arkansas to be precise. During the QA period, when she asked if anyone had questions, a girl asked her if it was true that lemon juice was a good contraceptive option. She didn't understand, so the girl explained that after her boyfriend came inside of her, she would squeeze lemon juice into her vagina to prevent pregnancy from occurring. I wasn't there but can only imagine the look on my mother's face based on the way she reacted to my idiocy throughout my childhood. I ate a brick of Velveeta cheese this morning and I'm having abdominal pain. If I massage my prostate using my wife's DLDO, it makes it easier for me to pee. What do you mean? I can't eat an entire fruit cake? Isn't fruit supposed to be healthy? Diabetic type 2 with a blood sugar level of 450 mg/dl. Nurse here. We work with patients with kidney issues. Our biggest misconception: the product no salt is totally safe to eat. Wrong. No salt is a potassium-based product to mimic salt texture for food. But now puts you into a whole new issue with having high potassium from frequent use, leading to cramping, arrhythmias, and even death. Edit. I saw this picking up and wanted to clarify. You can eat potassium in your diet. Fruits and vegetables are always safe to eat, as long as they are not in high excess. Eating 8 potatoes a day is not what I'd call an average diet. The problem with the shaker design is you can't regulate how much you're putting on. And most people don't record daily quantity. If your doctor is prescribing you potassium tablets due to hypokalemia, that is a safe example of a good potassium intake. I had to explain to a pregnant woman once that the baby is coming out of her vagina. She was almost 6 months pregnant and was horrified. I think she thought all babies were just C-sectioned out. I overheard a guy talking to another at a pregnancy clinic. I just don't get it. She was standing up. The sperm would have just come out. How is she pregnant? And both of them seemed very confused. One person didn't think the stroke they were having was a big deal because they could get some brain transplanted from donors, right? I couldn't even. There's so many. A load of people on medication and they have no idea what they're taking it for. Oh. Do you have any health conditions? No. 10 minutes later I ask, no conditions? No diabetes? Or high blood pressure? Oh yes, I have those. Oh lord. There was this really sheltered guy I knew who used to ask, which would you rather have? Balls that were the size of baseballs or softballs? And we thought it was some weird hypothetical. Turned out no. He had one the size of each. Obviously. Dude had some serious medical issues going on. But when we found out, I can only imagine the conversation that guy ended up having with the doctor. My pre-med college roommate thought penises retracted inside the abdomen. My favorite teenage patient was asking about birth control and thought you could just wear the Nuvaring on your wrist instead of having to insert it in your vagina. Thankfully we got her on something else. To be fair, wearable birth control does exist in the form of Crocs. Unfortunately it comes with the side effects of having to wear Crocs. Sexually active means the level of activity during sex. I offered a diabetic a tissue after doing a finger prick to mop the 2 drops of blood on his finger. He looked at me like I was an absolute idiot. Said you don't know very much do you, and sucked the blood off his finger. Then spent the next 5 minutes educating me that because he was a diabetic, he needed all the blood he had. Therefore he needed to put it back into his body rather than wasting it by putting it on a tissue. He was under the impression that if he just drank his blood it would go straight back into circulation. Edit. Guys and girls, thanks so much for all the awards, upvotes, and comments. But please stop, I literally can't get through it all and I want to go to bed. Not the dumbest, but most recent. I had a patient who needed a tooth extracted. Young teenage girl. Obviously very sheltered. She was telling me how bad it hurts and I asked her what she takes for pain. I apply a little clove oil to it when it keeps me up at night. I asked if that works and she goes not really. When I told patient and mom to control post-operative pain with ibuprofen and acetaminophen, they looked at me like I had grown a second head. I'm a dentist and the thing we get all the time that I hate is parents not caring about their child's decay because of theory just baby teeth. Losing baby teeth early causes all sorts of problems aside from the pain and trauma, but in addition to that I often have to explain to parents that the adult teeth that erupt at age 6 are meant to last forever. They're always oblivious. My mother asked me once, completely serious, why brain transplants were not possible. She didn't understand why if you had an inoperable brain tumor they couldn't just pop a new one in there like it was a heart or liver. I tried to explain to her that it wouldn't be the same person, but she just stared at me blankly. I love my mother, but oof, that was probably one of the stupidest conversations I've ever had. Hypothetically, if you had a brain transplant would you just be in a new body? I once administered a certain type of breathing test to a 58-year-old female patient who worked at a manufacturing plant on 8-hour shifts. In self-reporting her smoking history, she told me she smoked up to 8 packs of cigarettes a day. I think her misconception was that she was going to live forever. Previous medic here. But I don't have any sugar in my house. I'm type 1 and trying to lose weight on the keto diet. I'm drinking only water and not eating for 30 days to detox my liver and kidneys. Said the perfectly healthy 25-year-old, also a medic. Oh, my daughter has croup. So I just sliced up some onions and put them in her socks for her to wear to bed. Oh yeah. That'll do it. Angry son of a COPD patient. Set my mom's oxygen higher. If you set IT higher she won't have COPD. I had to explain to a patient's dad that his son's heart was at risk due to fluid inside the pericardial sac. We call it a pericardial tamponade. That man flat out refused to believe that human hearts have a membrane around them because he had dissected a sheep heart in high school and never saw no sac. I'm a veterinarian and I can't tell you how many nipples I have diagnosed. P.S. Well, I had one girl that really thought if she had sex in the shower she could not get pregnant because all the sperm must fall out and go down the drain. Her boyfriend had been convinced as well. They did, indeed, end up pregnant. There had been a lot of stand-up shower sex. I caught a patient drinking his own urine once. He thought it would help heal him. Somehow. I have never looked at a water pitcher the same way and I always check to make sure it's water. The one is about a nurse. I had to help another nurse put a Foley catheter in, a sterile tube that drains urine from the bladder. She, new nurse, had been trying to put the catheter into the patient's clit. Needless to say, the nurse was confused and the patient was confused as well. When I put the catheter into her urethra, obviously not her clit, It felt much worse for the patient than what had previously been going on. Not me, but my sister. Currently in residency. She was with a patient who had a severe pain in her thigh. They screened her. Ran thousands of tests and nothing came out of it. They later found out she had a bullet in her arm, but that it had hit her from behind. So it couldn't be seen when she lay down on her back. She thought her thigh was in her arm. I seriously do not get how they didn't find it, since this is more common in ER situations, but I guess mistakes slip through sometimes. Edit. I don't understand either why the lady didn't point out the fact that they were checking her leg instead of her arm. But she was supposedly very problematic in general, and I just feel gratitude to the healthcare workers who have to be nice to people that behave like assholes. This is why I always ask patients to point to the pain with one finger. Patients call body parts all kinds of crazy non-anatomical names. I've had a few good ones. But the funniest actually happened during my first year of college studying PT. Someone raised their hand in A&P early on in learning about muscles, their attachments, actions, and innervations. He asked why humans don't have meat like cows, pigs, and other edible animals. Prof stalled for a second, holding it together. Then asked if anyone else was wondering about this. Roughly a third of the class, perhaps 20 people, raised their hands. She spent the next few minutes explaining, convincing people that muscles are in fact the meat. It was hilarious. Edit. Also, I asked her after class. I had breast reduction surgery. My husband went to the pre-op with me. The doctor was explaining the surgery and mentioned they would remove my nipples. My husband asked where they were going to get new ones from. No. 12 years later and we joke about wondering where the nipple locker is. Not a medical professional. But I have a major medical condition that can damage the lungs. If one is having a flare of said disease, a great big warning sign is coughing up blood. So, every single doctor I see, no matter the speciality, asks if I've coughed up blood. I finally asked one time who in their right mind doesn't call the doctor. Or 911. If they are coughing up blood. The doctor looks at me and says a whole lot of people. I did work in care management for medical insurance. One day I was doing paperwork and the care coordinator next to me busted out laughing. When I asked why, she said that the man who was on the phone with had just had quadruple bypass and was on his way home from a month-long stay. He was calling to coordinate his cardiac rehab. While on the phone with her, he was ordering his 20-piece from KFC. She said, "You have to laugh or you will just hate the world." My favorite was a patient calling my department 3 times with concerns about having to abstain from taking her blood pressure medication prior to an exercise treadmill stress test. She's afraid one missed dose of her metoprolol would give her a heart attack. She is very concerned because her blood pressure is so high these days. So I asked her if she's taking all her prescribed doses. She said she's supposed to take it twice a day, but often she only takes it in the morning. And only half of what her doctor ordered. So effectively this lady was taking 1/4 of her BP med and couldn't figure out why her pressure isn't under control. Not a medical professional. But I was at the hospital after an injury and another patient who just had his left leg amputated. Asked the doctor how long it would take for it to grow back. I thought he was joking and chuckled. He shot an angry look at me and I realized he was serious. I'm training to be a midwife. And once met an expectant father who panicked when he heard that his daughter was breech because he thought this meant that she was going to come out of his wife's ass. Actually took a chunk out of the inside of my cheek, trying not to laugh. I had a female friend that had a similar misunderstanding. She was about 25 at the time and thought an LSX was how you got pregnant. Her logic was, the baby lives in the mom's tummy, which is what the ass connects to. Whereas the vagina went nowhere. She miraculously had not gotten pregnant already because you will always get a disease if you have vaginal sex. 100% guaranteed every time, so she and her boyfriend had always used condoms. They assumed when they wanted to have a baby he'd put it in her ass, because that doesn't cause diseases, and she'd get pregnant. We thought she was joking. It took the better part of the evening to explain how it all really works to her. I was getting dressed for a hunt with my EMT friend and he goes, "Dude, you've got a hernia." I was like, "No. I'm just growing an outie." He then proceeded to tell me how dumb I am. A few months later I had hernia surgery. SMH. Edit. Thank you kind people for all the upvotes. Easily my largest uptick ever. I'm in the mental health field, but I met with a client who was worried that if their relative had a heart transplant, would the relative still love and remember them? The logic being that the feeling of love lives in the heart. I explained to several women over my medical career that they do not pee out of their vaginal canal. A few did not believe me. I've had male patients in my audiology clinic tell me they have fallopian tube issues. Perhaps I shouldn't assume they mean eustachian tube issues. But I do. This isn't so much a misconception about the human body. But when I was an ER nurse, a common misconception from patients was that I was testing their urine for drugs. And that I would call the police or report to their employer that they popped positive for something. If this has ever been you, know that it is illegal for us to disclose a drug test performed for medical purposes to anyone without your permission, including the police, aside from litigious situations when it's required. If the police brought someone in handcuffs and wanted a drug and alcohol test, it was a whole lot of paperwork. And if I remember correctly, they needed a court order. Also, I do not give a if you do drugs. Just tell me the truth so I can help you. And so I don't accidentally give you something that could interact with what you've taken and make things worse. The conversation stays between us and the doctor. And I can assure you we don't give a and we would be fired for disclosing that information to anyone without your permission. I had to explain to a couple 45 plus that treating the wife's yeast infection only but continuing to have sex without treating the husband would result in them both having a yeast infection. A young, talking maybe 17 years old, that feeding their neonate powdered milk was not the same as formula and that they were starving the baby. So many. So many. Shoulder rehab after surgery on recurrent instability. Range of motion was not improving, so I ask if the patient is in pain. "Oh no, but I can't move my arm past 90 degrees because I feel the screws the surgeon put in and I don't want to break them by forcing the movement. It was the acromion bone." After a visual explanation, flexion magically went up to 120. Maybe the surgeon could have explained the procedure better? But sometimes I spend entire sessions repeating the same thing only to have patients ask me the same question over and over again. Health-related beliefs and fears hold tight in our brains. Working in an ER as a nurse practitioner, I had a patient's granddaughter who was pregnant. Ask me if she dyed her hair, would it also dye her baby's hair? Made my day. I used to take retinal photos to look for diabetic retinopathy when I would call to make appointments. More than once a patient said, "Well, I just saw the proctologist." No sir. These are retinal photos, not rectal photos. Can you email me my medications? Sure. I can send them electronically to any pharmacy you want. No. Skip the pharmacy. Ain't there some fancy schmancy way now you can send an email of some kind? And I just print it out and eat it? Or I scan it with my phone and listen to it with headphones or some or other? I'm afraid not. Sir. You know. One day we will look back on this comment and laugh as we print out our daily vitamins. I don't always take my blood pressure meds. Only when it's high. Had a mother ask if it was true that the soft spot of her baby's head was like a whale blowhole that he could breathe out of. Apparently her own mother had told her that. Baby came out face down. Father freaked out his child was born without a face. We had a good laugh after. A couple was pregnant and didn't understand why since they were taking the birth control pill. It turns out it was the guy who was taking it. My dad doesn't have a clue on anything that happens in the body. I told him I work in a tissue lab and he asked, "Oh, are you developing new Kleenex?" When I told him that I work with body tissue, this man really said, "Oh. I don't think I have that. I had a colleague in her 30s with children who had come to the UK after marriage. She asked me one day if you could use tampons before you were married. She honestly had no clue about her own anatomy. In my EMT class, the instructor asked us why women are more likely to have UTIs. One of my female classmates offered up dirty fingers as her answer. Long time ago, when I was a nursing student doing my L&D clinicals, I had a young girl who was pregnant admitted for early delivery. She was 5 centimeters dilated and having routine contractions. She told us it was too early for the baby and wanted to know when she could discharge to home. If anyone cares, she stayed in the hospital and had a baby that day. I wouldn't call it stupid because it comes from a deeply caring place, but many people think that a palliative person who's not eating needs a feeding tube so they do not starve to death. Overheard in a clinical, so not mine specifically, but that vaginas are extra pockets. And that it was safe to carry whatever you could fit in there around. I'm sure that provider had a fun conversation. I really wish I could have heard the rest of that. Well, what do you expect when designers won't put pockets in women's dresses? That the human anus was made to take a hot sauce bottle. Spoiler alert. I am a medical professional, but this stupid misconception didn't come from a patient. It came from my own mother. In a casual conversation about the menopause between my sisters and myself, we got onto the subject of vaginal dryness and different things we had all tried. Now I'm one of 9 kids. I have 6 sisters. We are all at the same perimenopausal or menopause stage in life. My mum chimes into the conversation with this absolutely corker: "I was never dry down there because the urine makes you wet." Well, we all look at one another as if to say, well, I ain't gonna explain this one. She had gone through her entire life think everything urine, poop, babies, period, blood and sex all happened in one hole. Now I get that older folks didn't get sex education, but hell, she had lots of kids, several husbands, and was an assistant on a labor and delivery ward. And yes, my username is rather ironic. Have you had any surgeries? Nope. Does CT scan and sees gallbladder is missing? Did you have your gallbladder removed? Oh yeah, but that was so long ago. It doesn't grow back. Most heartbreaking one for me. I worked for a bit in a horrifically medically underserved community. I asked a patient about medical history. He of course said he had no illnesses. I asked if he had diabetes and he said, oh yeah, but everyone does. I didn't think that counted. He had no idea he was literally dying from his poorly controlled diabetes. We started dialysis that very day. Not a DR, but my grandfather, 92, had a bleed in his eye. The DR said that he just wanted it to resolve itself. My mom, and her infinite internet education, decided that the solution was to take him off his daily aspirin to stop the bleeding. She didn't tell me for 2 weeks until she was taking him back because his eye was getting worse. Of course, I flipped out and lectured her. He was having a stroke and lost vision in his eye. Her conclusion was that the DR could see why she made that decision. No remorse. There seems to be a common misconception that diabetes only needs to be treated temporarily and then it will go away in the absence of lifestyle changes. I have seen this a lot in primary care. Do you have diabetes? No. I used to and finished my medication. Check labs and surprise surprise, extra uncontrolled diabetes. When I worked pediatrics, I had a 16-year-old kid pull his penis out and ask me if it was the right size. He said he'd heard about something called a micropenis and wanted to make sure his was the right size. He was almost tearful, telling me he had no one to ask and didn't want to Google it. I reassured him, but I'm still slightly suspicious it was a kink. Holistic doctors have convinced a lot of people that adding bleach to their drinking water will cure chronic diseases. Literally a high enough dosage to stain clothing being drank through a straw. Best part is there's no convincing them otherwise. This doesn't quite fit here, but I wanted to share it after reading other stories on here. A lot of the time I don't think people are being genuinely stupid because a lot of these stories are just misunderstandings from people who aren't educated to the level of a medical professional. I looked after someone once who was having her third baby. She was very distressed about how she was treated during her second labor because she had repeatedly asked for gas and air. And had only been given Anatomical. They are exactly the same thing. It's just a different name for the same thing. She had been really upset no one was listening to her in her second labor. And no one took a couple of minutes just to explain it to her. Her perception of her experience was real to her. We have to be very careful to take the time to ensure the message we are sending is the message being received by patients.